So the first thing we did was put in place outcome-based objectives versus activity. And then what that really looks like, and upskilling people on an outcome versus an activity, and really upskilling managers to assess outcomes versus activities. And then the other thing was we really put in place was ensuring within those outcomes that they're tied to local results, regional results, and global results. So that way employees feel they have a line of sight to what they're looking to achieve, but it's also tied to the bigger picture. So it's tied to their individual performance, but it's tied to the broader picture.
Allison, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Looking very colorful today.
Yes, thank you. I have to bring the spirit of summer to the podcast, and really excited to have the warm weather here. So
amazing. When you say here, you probably, your accent may mislead people when you say here. So where is here? Where is here?
So here is Switzerland. So it's Zurich, Switzerland, right outside Zurich. But I am American. But we're enjoying the summer here in Switzerland, which is fantastic in the Alps, the lakes, swims, and everything outdoors.
Before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about your journey to where we are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I never intended to be in HR. I actually wanted to be a sports anchor. That was my original dream. And I went to college doing broadcast journalism, played every sport known to man. I think I played 12 different or got 12 different letters in high school in every single sport you can imagine. So I was very passionate about that. But after doing some informational interviews, the industry just didn't line up with my ethics and values and where I wanted to be as a professional. So I gave up the pipe dream and went to the next best thing, which was consulting. Nothing at all to do with it. But no, I went into consulting at Anderson Consulting, or now Accenture, to learn a new skill set on the IT systems. And they basically took people they thought had strong learning agility, threw you in the mix, goal-driven, passionate around succeeding. And so I started out there. My backup plan, my minor was in marketing. So I did IT systems consulting for a while, but kept gravitating toward marketing, business development. So I realized, well, let me give that a shot. And it was actually at that next job when I was doing marketing and business development that I moved into HR. What was happening was I was an account manager, and it was one of those situations where people were being promoted into managerial levels. And unfortunately, they weren't given a lot of skills and capabilities how to manage. So I saw directly from a business perspective the impact that poor management can have on employee turnover, losing accounts, affecting the bottom line. And I'm somebody, I can't just step back and not do anything. So I put together a business case for the CEO, and I put together all the analytics talking about how we need to put a management development program in place and how it would pay off within 6 months. He loved it, and he said, you know what, I want you to lead it. So that was my parlay into HR, and I never looked back. And that's really what I love, is the intersection of business and HR.
Wow, where do I start in unpacking that? You mentioned that sort of learning agility you're looking for. A lot of that could be seen in just sports, right? You have to be adaptable, constantly learning new things. You're willing to fail forward. You lose games, you win games, right? You have to be coachable in order to be a good athlete as well, right? And then you link that with the marketing background that you have, and sales and business development. You've got a very good combination there of what it means to be a HR leader. The intersection between marketing and HR has never been more compelling. You definitely need to be able to sell if you're a HR leader, so you definitely need a bit of business development in there, and you 100% need a growth mindset to be there. So you also come for it through many lenses, but also that commercial lens that you just mentioned. You mentioned it's essential for HR to run like a business when we last spoke, and you just mentioned it briefly there again. Break that down. What does that mean? What do you mean by that?
So I think it's really important that HR holds ourselves to the same standard that any other function would be. So take marketing, for example. They have a lot of spend under the belt, so they really have to justify all of their spend and really look at the ROIs. When they develop a marketing program, they do co-creation in their design. They do end user testing. They're more agile in their cycles to learn from essentially what's working, what's not working, adjust as needed. And I really believe strongly that HR should also hold ourselves to the same standards in terms of using data analytics to drive decision-making, making sure we're measuring outcomes and not activities, making sure that we're agile and can keep pace, that we're scalable, They were able to use ROIs to determine where to make a change or when it's needed, and also to measure the impact we're having on the business. So there's a number of things that that are basically the vision of that, but then a number of things we do in HR to back that up with the initiatives we put in place.
Where do we even start on that? You mentioned rewarding impact versus activity. Could you give an example?
So I think, unfortunately, too often that people get rewarded, whether it's through bonuses or promotions based on activities they've done, without really being able to show how that activity drove the business outcome. So one example was I worked for a company previously where people were getting paid out their short-term incentive targets, but the business wasn't achieving its goals, and it continued to happen over and over again. So not only was the company losing money, but clearly they weren't rewarding the right outcomes that they needed to achieve. Mm-hmm. So the first thing we did was put in place outcome-based objectives versus activity. And then what that really looks like, and upskilling people on an outcome versus an activity, and really upskilling managers to assess outcomes versus activities. And then the other thing was we really put in place was ensuring within those outcomes that they're tied to local results, regional results, and global results. So that way employees feel they have a line of sight to what they're looking to achieve, mm-hmm. but it's also tied to the bigger picture. So it's tied to their individual performance, but it's tied to the broader picture. So 100% of what they achieve is based on how the company does. That's the denominator. But then you have a multiplier based on how you did, based on those outcome-based objectives for your individual function or regional function. And then that way there's a connection between the global results, regional results, local results, but also as an individual and as a team. Mm-hmm. So it's a nice connection in terms of ensuring that outcomes are rewarded versus activities. And the other thing we've done is everyone knows the distribution curve, so we don't force a distribution curve, but we do say if a function has out-achieved, theoretically, it should be skewed more to the right, more toward a high performance curve. If a function has not achieved, theoretically, the rating should skew more to the left. Again, not with reinforcing, but saying it's an outcome-based, and it should be reflective of the rewards people get, the ratings people get, as well as those opportunities from that.
How does this shift the type of work that you and the team, when you talk about running HR like a business and being, as a function, being focused on impact rather than activity yourselves, as well, how does that change the type of work and how you structure your team and your strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a good example where we used concrete data analytics to determine even the model we put in place in HR. So for example, we're a hyper-growth company, so we're growing leaps and bounds. And when I joined, we were about 4,900 employees, and we had 131 FTE in HR. But because we were looking to grow to about 6,300 employees, which we are now, first of all, we looked at the average requisition load per recruiter and it wasn't even doable. It would have made like 120 recs per recruiter. We looked at how much we were spending on agency spend, which was a whopping $11 million per year. Wow. Because we consume it externally. And 60% of those open recs, we went to agency. We didn't have a strong brand in the market because you can imagine we had agencies all over the place with different approaches. We didn't have any pipelining of talent because you had a different agency for every requisition. And we also essentially were spending a more higher rate cost per hire than you normally would if you had a mixture of an in-house or outsourced model. So based on that, we put a new requisition model in place, which was essentially different regional talent acquisition recruiters that are in-house, an executive recruiter in-house, but then we went with an out-house RPO, which is through one of the vendors we work with. And we were able to scale in our hyper growth to ensure that the rec load was manageable, and we actually achieved 51% additional resources on top to be able to keep pace with the rec load. But you could say, so what? How'd you do on recruiting? And that's where the outcomes come in. So essentially we put in place the targets in terms of quality of hire metrics and baseline targets that we outperformed year one. We put in place hiring manager quantitative metrics to ensure that we were paced with how the hiring managers felt about our process, candidate surveys as well, to ensure we outpace that. Time to fill, we want to make sure we're at least on par with the agencies in time to fill, mm-hmm. and also that new hires we bring on stay and continue to grow with the company within the year, 2 years. And so we got the payoff. And now that rather than spending $11 million per year, we keep the agency spend at 3%, which used to be 60%.
3%, do you say? From 60 to 3?
So 3%, yeah.
Wow.
And we went from 60% to 3%. And so we do allow some agency spend, obviously, with some of these critical roles that are more senior, but we're very selective in where that is. And we also measure, for example, there were some where the RPO actually was doing the search, handed it over to a search firm, and they ended up having the exact same time to fill. So there was no better off through the search firm, those particular agencies. So we track that to essentially make sure that we're not impeding the business. We're still delivering quality work while at the same time saving the company money and at the same time getting the time to fills that we're looking for throughout the business. But if we didn't have those metrics and we're measuring outcomes, then it would be difficult, I think, for the business to change from wanting to go from their search firm, whatever they had to search, to accepting the new model if we didn't have the metrics to really show that it was actually exactly same quality, if not better in many cases.
Amazing. Getting the metrics is one part and the software. The other part is actually going through the change and transformation. Yeah. What were sort of the bigger challenges that you had to face in changing that?
So the biggest one is, in this particular example, the change management, because you could imagine if you're a hiring manager and you have well, you just want to go to a search firm, pick whoever you want, and you want to get going. So one of the big changes was having a consistent approach to using this outsourced model and getting people used to the outsourced model. It was also getting people used to using our new global workday system, because we had to track recs, whereas before they would just go off and running without doing that. It was getting people used to that there were certain protocols they had to follow as hiring managers. So we had a consistent brand, consistent messaging when we were out in the marketplace. So it was things like that. But then once they saw, like I said, the metrics or the quality of the candidates, then it started to change, turn the tide and also be able to see the types of candidates we were getting. So essentially, I think it's really using the metrics to combat any potential emotional connection people had with wanting just go with their search firm, and also showing that the candidates they were getting were continue to be top notch, and the candidate survey results as well. So I think it was a combination of all things as well. But that was just one piece of our transformation. We've been transforming HR to run like a business across many different areas, but that was just one example.
What are some of the practical things you did in terms of how you position your brand? Like you mentioned before, you had 60% across multiple companies where they're all probably selling a different narrative of what it means to work at the organization. How did you approach that?
So we designed our own employee value proposition for two purposes. One, to then transform into our employer brand, but also two, to be honest, to solidify our culture at Galderma, because we were a spinoff from Nestle, so a broader company, and we're our own pure play dermatology company. So we really wanted to define our culture. So we started with interviews, focus groups, all levels, and really said, what keeps you at Galderma? What excites you about Galderma? And then we built that into our, and there are top 5 things, and we built that into our employee value proposition that then gets translated in our employer brand. And now we are literally launching it as we speak externally, which is called Faces of Galderma. So we use our own employees with their own quotes that is tied to why they joined Galderma. And then this is embedded in the hiring manager guide in solidifying the top 5 reasons. Everybody always asks me, what's the culture like at Galderma? And I always answer the same way that people answer that you could ask in any focus group. But this way now, at least it's consistent and our brand is consistent out there. So the brand has the same brand material. It has the same purpose, which is advancing dermatology for every skin story. But the tagline, if you will, is things that are different that are tied to our brand. An example is make your mark, because something specific about Galderma is being able to make an impact because of our size. Another one is diversify your career, grow with us, because a big thing for us is being able to work across 3 business lines. So it's things like that, and that's defined in the taglines and the interviews we have in our brand. But that's how we built it in the hiring manager, essentially their talking points, but also on our careers website to make sure that people really understand consistently the brand of Galderma. And it ties to our corporate brand too, which is advancing dermatology for every skin.
Amazing. So you kind of created that common language for those leaders, but also giving them, just as you said, those guides to like hear the points so they can use them practically during conversations, during interviews. How do you mentioned those stories and quotes, do you share them externally?
Exactly. So we share them internally and externally. Like, so when you go onto our career website, it'll have a quote from a real employee, but that quote is tied to one of these 5 pillars that we got from the employer value proposition. So it really speaks to the true reason that people join the company. Because if what you're promoting is different than what you feel internally, then anybody you hire will leave very
Just as
shortly
quick.
after. It won't match.
I
Yeah.
hear that all the time. I speak to so many people like that, or they'll see things that their company posts on social media or LinkedIn, and they're like, "That's not who we are," or "That's not the experience that I'm getting."
Yes.
And you're right. You may attract people, but they'll leave just as quick
Right.
as well. So, is that what you meant? Because we spoke before, and you said stay laser focused and ruthlessly prioritize the most critical value drivers. Is that what you mean?
Yes, this is
Is that
another aspect.
yeah?
Yeah, so this is another aspect because we got to boil down so that we boil down our priorities across three areas, which is areas to grow the business, grow our people, and grow the HR function. And when I say grow, I mean develop and
Mm-hmm.
continue to upskill. And out of those three areas, we have no more than 3 to 4 priorities for each of those for the whole entire HR function. And so I'll give you an example. One of the priorities this year was to develop a general manager leadership development program, which is a 9-month program, mixture of on-the-job learning, formal learning, peer-to-peer coaching, and so forth. But of course, one of the questions we get, this is fantastic. When are you going, we want all people managers. We want this. We want this. Of course, because you could do a million things. But the point is you need to focus on those most critical value drivers and then build on that at the rate that you can support real impact. So if we just rolled out everything at once, we wouldn't have the resources to manage it. We wouldn't have the resources to measure impact. And then it would become a flavor of the month because you wouldn't be able to, I call it the product optimization phase, ensuring that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck. I think, and then within these ruthlessly priorities, we always make sure, take, for example, the short-term incentive pay for performance I just mentioned. We put that back in our priorities this year, even though we launched it last year, because we need to fully embed it. And it'll probably be in our priorities another year.
Yeah, it takes time. Yeah.
Because you need to account for that. Otherwise, you just continue to ask people to do new things. And then if you do that, first of all, people get burnout. Second of all, then it ends up becoming flavors of the month and you never truly have full impact. So we always build for new product launches. Again, thinking in marketing terms, new product launches, but also product maintenance, optimization of those products we launched to ensure that you're truly embedding. One last example, the outcome-based objective. I actually just got the results back. First year we rolled it out, about 60% of people had outcome-based objectives. We just did another assessment. Now it's 90%. So it's from last year to this year. But if we just said outcome-based objectives and then moved on to our next topic and didn't embed it and fully optimize it, it would have become a flavor of the month. And that's what we make sure we ruthlessly prioritize on.
Do the managers and individual employees have like a dashboard they can see of what those objectives are? So it's kind of their transparency.
Oh, yes, they have their objectives in their Workday system. And also we talk about the tracking of how they're doing based on that. Some are very specific to the brand, like market share, and they have trackings on that. But then, for example, they have business results they're accountable for that are specific objectives, and then people results. So that's the other thing.
That's really an important point. Yeah. But
yes. So we actually, for the first time, put in place leadership accountabilities last year with very clear KPIs around 3 primary areas, which is engaging and retaining your teams, development and succession planning, and building an ethical and compliant culture. And these are included in their objectives along with their business objectives. And so now we're coming up on mid-years, and we had talked about out of those outcome-based objectives, which have KPIs associated with them, how are you tracking against this? And that becomes part of their performance review. Because what we say to them is you're not a product leader, you're not a project leader, you're a people leader. So that entails business results plus people results. And holistically, that's what they're held accountable for.
So that's also linked back to their compensation.
Correct. And the ratings.
And everything else,
and how they're evaluated.
What was the reception of that?
So the reception was, exactly. So I think it was, if I can be very honest with you, I think they thought it was going to be a flavor of the month. I think they were waiting for
Oh, you'll forget about it. It's just another thing. But to your point,
here comes HR. Yeah. Whereas I don't do flavors of the month, and I don't do check the box activities. I'm pretty relentless when it comes to it.
I can tell.
So people really get it. And so I'll give you an example. We just did a leadership development program, and I said, think about this. Think back to a previous manager you had. Think about the best manager you had. And think about what they did. Did they focus on your career? Did they care about you as an individual? Did they help you to grow and develop? Did they mentor you? And how much more likely were you to stay with them, to continue to grow with them, versus a manager who just delegated, didn't give you any guidance, didn't pay attention to you? And how likely were you to stay with that company, offer discretionary effort? I said, HR is here to provide the approach and the tools and so forth, but people stay for their managers or leave because of the direct managers. So that's really with the biggest impact. And that's where a lot of ahas started going off and why they realized leadership accountabilities is so important on the people side.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. One of the things that I know that is you're something you're really passionate about is really building and designing the business and your function to be able to adapt to market conditions. Could you share more on how you're doing that?
Yeah, so Galderma is a high-paced organization, fastest-paced company I've worked at, and I absolutely love it. So I think either you love it or you hate it, but I love it. So what it means is you need to be agile and adapt very quickly. Just a couple of examples. So one example was one of the products I had mentioned. We realized that our sales team was not necessarily selling a particular product that was our most profitable product. So it was really working very closely with commercial excellence on the sales incentive plans and really looking at how can we double down incentivizing more on particular products and doing that real time, not waiting until, end of year, because by then, essentially the year is over from a revenue perspective. The other thing is we developed a global capability center in Barcelona that was not planned for, but when we realized our infrastructure cost in Switzerland was higher, outpacing where we needed to be from a revenue perspective, we built a global capability center, I would say in record time, recruited a number of roles over there versus in Switzerland, and we were able to transfer a number of skill sets over to this new capability center that we had to build up a new legal entity, the tax structure, everything that came with it in record time. So, and that was not something planned, not to say, but it was basically one of these when you take a step back and you realize, based on market conditions, we need to make an adjustment here on our infrastructure costs. Based on market conditions, we need to make an adjustment based on which products we're selling. So it's really, and all this is in tandem with the business. This is obviously not HR doing this solely, but that's where the great partnership comes when HR runs like a business, is being able to
they're one in the same
collaborations. Yeah.
No, I love that. It's so important because it's always funny whenever I do our events. As you know, we do our face-to-face events, and we see a presentation with someone sharing their 4-year plan, and I'm like, that's not going to look the same. We're not getting the 4 years from where we are now. You have to have the ability to pivot and be agile. Otherwise, that's just not going to work. Anyone thinking they're going to have a 5-year... Me and Shane had a great business plan when we started this company. It looks nothing like what our business plan did at the time. So you need to be able to adapt and have that flexibility to win.
There's a saying in the military, I think, no plan has ever survived a battlefield. It's true. Where you go in with a plan, but you have to adjust pretty quickly when you see the market conditions.
Yeah, you've mentioned a lot around data and analytics. Are you using specific tools, or is this all within Workday? Like, where are you drawing all this analytics for? What does that look like?
Yeah, so we're using Workday, but to be honest, we'd like to take it to another level. I'm very passionate about data analytics and insights, and I think it comes from my previous consulting. It is still manual, I would say. So take, for example, the outcome-based objective that I just quoted. We have to do a lot of that is manual, where you go and you come up with a 5-point scale, what creates a outcome-based objective, and it's very manual to assess that from a qualitative perspective. Whereas other things like are very quantifiable, such as the RPO model. And so we rely a lot, that's something actually you can get from both Workday and our systems, because everything is through Workday and in partnership with our RPO. But that's very tangible, quantifiable, rates, but it's also some qualitative. What we'd like to get to is things obviously where you can push a button and be able to get these analytics, but it's just not something we have. We always joke, we say at our company, you have to be quite gritty. You have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and be able to understand, the analytics you need, and then find a way to get it in a way that is sustainable and scalable over time, even leveraging the technology. What we have done for the HR function, because of Workday and through case management and Workday, we've been able to scale the HR function with that growth I mentioned from 4,800 to 6,300 employees. We started with 130 FTE in HR. We even were able to reduce to 110, even though our employee base had grown, because we're leveraging Workday and technology and case management to be able to answer the standard questions, where's my payroll? Where are the benefits? And then use the HR business partners to focus on the most strategic value driving work, which is leadership development, organization design, creating a people strategy, succession planning, and really being smart with the resources we have. And I think that's why running HR like a business, I've always had that mantra, but it's even more important in a private equity owned environment where every single resource counts. And that's where I think you really have to be concrete where you're using your resources.
When you spun off the business, was the technology that you use now already in place, or did you start from scratch? Is it legacy?
Start from scratch. Yeah. So we, with the spinoff, actually, that's been part of the other transformation, and everyone's going through this end-to-end transformation, which is we relied a lot on Nestle, but then when we spun off from Nestle, that's who we spun off from. We had to create our own end-to-end global system. So Workday was our first global HR end-to-end system, and we implemented, and I can tell you, coming from IT systems integration, in record time. I think it was implemented in 9 months or something
Wow.
for a global system. Now, of course, you need to continue
I
working
know.
through the integration and so forth, but it was record time, and that's just the pace we're at. But there are other things that we put in place that are global systems, order to cash, and a number of other things from a financial system perspective, procurement perspective. And that's what people are doing on top of their day job. So we're transforming the business to be as efficient as possible and effective as possible while continuing in our hyper growth environment across these 3 business lines. So it's an exciting challenge.
Just out of curiosity, because the team and I are making a piece at the moment on sort of the whole technology landscape, because it's a minefield for HR leaders, right? Every day there's a new solution, technology popping up. Why Workday? There's so many platforms out there now, and I'm always interested to hear people's insights and perspectives.
Yeah, so to be honest, Workday was selected. That was selected before I joined, but I will tell you, I used to work with SAP SuccessFactors. I actually did pull this name from the past, PeopleSoft implementation for the day, which nobody even knows about anymore. But I will say that Workday has actually been extremely user-friendly. And the benefit of Workday is you can plug a lot of interfaces on it. So for example, the compensation module may not be the best in Workday, even though they have a number of great modules. But there are compensation modules if you want advanced comp to plug in quite nicely with it. So I like it as a foundational element that, again, you can either continue to add modules through it, or you can look at additional modules. But the nice thing is that integration, because again, I can tell you from IT system experience, it's so important that you have modules that can easily be integrated in. So I think that works quite well.
Amazing. You mentioned before succession planning, so I want to jump onto that. Steering succession planning and talent development. You mentioned that based on clear and concrete pathways. What do you mean by that?
So again, because I'm not a check the box person, and I like to do things with impact, this is actually a succession planning approach that I put in place years ago. And again, measuring impact, we realized this actually had significant impact, which is, it sounds simple, but a lot of times the most simplistic ways of approaching it actually have the biggest impact. So with succession planning, we really boil it down. We start at the upper levels and then go down from there, but we prioritize the top 5 skills and capabilities required to be successful in that role. And we are maniacal about this. I mean, you really pressure test these to say, are these the 5? And they can't be wishy-washy.
How do you come up with those, though? How do you come up with those?
So for example, if I'm doing it for the finance, I would sit down with the CFO and start with his role and really be crystal clear on those 5 skills and capabilities. One example I always use when I was with Heineken, but we sat down with the chief marketing officer to do this. And because he had such a large budget, he said, now normally he wouldn't put P&L in there, but because the chief marketing officer has the largest budget of the company many times, you need somebody with a certain significance of budget management as one of the 5. And again, so the idea is that you don't just put in visionary leadership, because that can be very fluffy.
Very concrete.
Nobody can develop it. Yes, very concrete. Then you do that, you assess where the incumbent is against it, and that becomes their development plan, where they need to grow. Each successor is validated against the 5. Can they achieve this? Are these things that are developable? And then based on that, whatever the 5 are the gaps, say gap 1 or 2, that becomes their concrete gap to close with the concrete targeted development actions to get them there. And then you measure it on a quarterly basis. So as an example, if somebody needs an experience that they can't get within their own function, then they get onto a cross-functional or business case challenge or something that's getting that to them. And then you're tracking their progress on that on a quarterly basis. So another one's networking, but being able to understand how global works versus regional, local. Then they're on a project related to that. But it's very concrete. And then you're measuring over time and assessing have they progressed in their succession advancement and succession adherence overall. So how are you doing from a succession adherence? And these metrics help make sure that it's not a check the box activity.
I think we're seeing a reoccurring theme here.
Have I mentioned check the box?
Have I mentioned impact and not activity? I love it. It's interesting because I've always thought that that they would have to meet those 5 criteria. So you're not being unrealistic to say we're only going to hire someone that meets all of these things, you understand there are going to be gaps, and that's going to be a conversation you'll have with that candidate from day one.
Well,
And
especially for the internal, I should say for the internal for sure. Those 5 skills and capabilities, they do get into, if you're looking externally, into the external. So that becomes the ideal candidate
yeah,
profile. But especially internally,
we
we want to
develop.
develop our people. They're not going to always have it. And
Okay,
so it's really about placing your bets on, again, some people with strong learning agility, go-getters, people have the potential to advance, and then we know they'll be able to close the gaps based on that, versus waiting for everyone to have those
sure.
experience.
But those more senior roles, you're going to scrutinize that way a lot more.
Yeah, yeah,
Of
yeah. Like
course.
exactly, so the
Yeah.
C-suite and so forth. But yeah.
Yeah. And then where does the role of the manager and the leader, how do they come into the equation on that?
Exactly. So this is part of their leadership accountability. So they are evaluated based on the succession pipeline that they've developed as a leader. So at mid-year review time, year-end review time, they are evaluated on how they're doing and advancing those successors within their team. So it's not just an HR accountability. It's really a people manager and leader accountability.
What's the objections that you typically get? Is it things I don't have time to do this whilst trying to
Yes.
do my, is that?
Yeah, so we get yeah, exactly. I don't have time. That's HR's job. But that's where we go back to, again, just bringing down anecdotal examples. So when you think about change management, if you get people to remember who helped them with their career and why that was so important, and also to think end to end. It's not just about what's in it for them, it's also what's best for the company. And if you're at certain levels, you are a leader for the company, not a leader for your specific role. So it's also helping them to recognize they have a role to play in this, again, as a people leader, because they're not a project leader.
You're already doing a million things so already, but what are you most excited about moving forward?
Yeah, so I would say what I'm most excited about is this evolution we've had as an HR function. So when I joined 2 years ago, I was actually just doing a town hall and I took a step back, and I'm really proud of our HR team. I really am proud of our HR function because we've been able to, like I said, transform, implement this global workday system, be able to focus on outcomes, not activities, continue to focus on those value creation drivers as an HR function, and find ways through our People Solutions Center and Workday to still manage and execute flawlessly on the fundamentals, but really focus on those differentiators. So what I'm most looking forward to is, as with anything, transformation takes time, and we're not fully through the journey yet. So I'm excited at the end of the journey to see where it will finally come to full fruition, because we're seeing, using data analytics, the progress we've made and the impact we've made. But I'm really excited to finish this journey with the team, because I think it's going to be hugely impactful and be able to be scalable with the organization going forward.
And I think one of the things that you've said, without maybe even people picking it up, a lot of things that you're talking about is business data, not HR data.
Right.
You're talking about HR in the business, and business is HR, right? You have to go beyond HR data, right? A lot of the decisions that you've been describing and mentioning is working directly hand in hand with the business.
Absolutely. And that's where I think that it goes back to our credibility as a function rests on us having strong business acumen, being courageous challengers, being coaches, and really being in the room as people. I love this anecdote where someone said, I would love to walk in a room, listen to an executive discussion, and have no idea who the HR person is, because everybody's contributing equally to the business topic. So that's actually the way I envision HR playing a role.
What advice would you give to leaders, though, perhaps aren't in the position that you're in right now, on how to really move to really HR being a bit part of the business?
Yeah, so I would say, I don't know if anyone's familiar with David Letterman, who watches the show, but he used to have the top 10 things list, and that's where I go back to the top 10 related to running HR like a business. So I would focus on the 10 items that at least I envision HR could focus on to run HR like a business, which is, we talked about some of them, but really using data analytics and insights to drive decision making, defining the outcome-based objectives and rewarding that versus activity, being agile and operating at pace, being able to adjust quickly to those market conditions and be agile, be scalable in redeploying resources at scale and at pace, staying laser focused and ruthlessly prioritizing on the things that really matter, steering succession planning and talent development in a very concrete and clear pathway, providing upskilling through targeted such assignments and just-in-time training, and being clear around the leadership accountabilities in this journey, And then finally launching HR products like a business, which includes product optimization to truly make an impact versus check the box.
Yeah. So
But this is really where I would advise people to say, we are part of the business just like everybody else, and we have a different function just like everybody else, but we all are contributing equally to these areas of the business. So let's think like business leaders in this sense.
I think, Allison, you're going to get a lot of our leaders reaching out to you on LinkedIn now. Asking you a lot of questions. I appreciate you coming. I love what you're doing, and you can hear the energy and passion for what you do as well. And even though you didn't plan on being in HR, I feel like it chose you along the way.
It did.
And you're here still, and you're smiling still, which is good.
I love it. I do love it, I have to say.
Yeah. Apart from that, keep up the amazing work, and I look forward to doing it again soon. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for having me. I absolutely loved it. Thank you.